Business, and it's my pleasure to be here with you today at our first Walker College of Business student shared reading discussion. The goal of this initiative is to inspire thought and conversation, and I hope that each of you will share your thoughts, ask questions, and please participate fully in this important and difficult discussion. This year's student shared reading book is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This work is a National Book Winner and Pulitzer Prize finalist, written in the form of a letter from the author to his son, set in the context of police violence against Black Americans. It is beautifully written, complex, and poetic. There is pain and anger in the work, as well as a perspective that while we all want easy answers, the reality of American history is that our dream of equality and equal opportunity has yet to be fully realized by all citizens of our country. Today's discussion will follow a different format from most of the book clubs that you might have participated in so far. We have the opportunity to listen in on a conversation about the book and its topics that's personal rather than academic. A conversation that brings together outstanding staff from across campus who will be speaking today as Black fathers, raising their children and grappling with the complexities of race in America, of race right here in our own community. We are excited to welcome Lamont Sellers, Appalachian State's Director of Intercultural Student Affairs, to lead the conversation today, along with colleagues invited from across campus. We're looking forward to thoughts and questions from this unique format. Thank you to each of you for being here today, both virtually and in person, and taking part in this important conversation. To start our reflection and to introduce Dr. Sellers, I'd like to invite Dr. Marianne Hoffman, Professor of Accounting and Inclusive Excellence Liaison and member of the Shared Reading Community to the stage. Thank you, Marianne.
Afternoon. It's great to see you all here in person, and good afternoon to those of you on Zoom. Does everybody have paper and pen or pencil? There were journals outside. We want you to participate, and the way you're going to participate initially is we want you to reflect on some of the issues that were in the book and that are about to be discussed. Just listening to other people talk about race is not enough. We need to evaluate our own attitudes, our potential biases, our preconceived ideas, and examine whether they are valid, whether they are complete. So there are some reflection questions up on the screen. You might want to think about one or more of those questions and jot down your thoughts. You may have read the book. How did the book impact the way that you think about race in America? If you haven't read the book, these are issues that, unless you've been hiding in a cave somewhere, you have to have had some thoughts about in the past year. Jot down your thoughts, questions that you might have for us afterwards. So we're just going to take a few minutes of silent reflection here to sort of think about what these issues mean to us, and then we will lead into the fishbowl conversation. Some profound thoughts are taking place, I can tell. Now it's my privilege to introduce our discussion leader, Dr. Lamont Sellers. Would you stand, please? Dr. Sellers is the Director of Intercultural Student Affairs at Appalachian State University. And you might wonder, why do we need an office of intercultural student affairs? Well, the role of educating all of us to appreciate differences is more important than many of us realize. You know, I grew up in the 60s playing cowboys and Indians, and never realized until I went to college, 10 years later, and out in the Midwest where there were Native American students, that maybe my picture of Native Americans was a little distorted and incomplete. And so this is a process of education. As we grow, we continue to learn more about the differences and to realize that not everybody grew up the same way that we did. And if you didn't grow up in a middle-class white neighborhood, maybe your view of the world isn't really complete. And when I read this book, it just kind of shook me to the core. I grew up thinking that police were people that you went to for help, and that if you were ever in trouble, look for a policeman. And it never occurred to me that some people might avoid policemen because even if they had done nothing wrong, that it could be a source of fear. And that just sort of like, wait a minute, how did that change my childhood? You know what I'm saying? So we need to learn, and we need, and it's kind of sad, but we do need this Office of Intercultural Student Affairs, and we are privileged to have Dr. Sellers here. This office provides mentoring and advocacy and community and identity affirmation for marginalized and underrepresented students. And then it also sponsors opportunities like diversity lecture series, programs similar to this, equity in action conferences, the MLK celebration, and other events, so that all of us can be educated and can learn to develop an appreciation for diversity and different perspectives. Dr. Sellers has held similar positions at other universities, most recently, University of South Dakota. And I have to say, I spent some time in Nebraska. South Dakota does not jump out in my mind as a place where there's a lot of diversity. A lot of blonde-haired, blue-eyed Northern Europeans, right?
Yes.
So I'm sure you really had your work cut out for you there. I'm hoping that we're making progress here at App State, and we really appreciate that you're here to help us in that endeavor. I have also been told that you have 4 amazing kids and that your wife, Maisha, works in financial aid. So welcome, and I will let you introduce the other members of the panel.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Today we are going to engage in what's called the fishbowl. So we're going to have a conversation, and we're going to forget that you all are here. You all are going to have the opportunity to listen in on our conversation, and then afterwards, we'll have someone that's going to come up and that will facilitate our Q&A with the audience here, as well as those that are joining us via Zoom. I want to do things a little different for us today. So in introducing ourselves, there's a West African concept that says that whatever room we walk into is much more full than what we see. That the sum total of all of the folks that have had an impact in our lives, good, bad, and the ugly, show up with us. So I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself the same way. All right, so I'm Lamont Sellers, Director of Intercultural Student Affairs. I was born and raised in Hampton, Virginia. My father is Ronnie Alfonso Sellers. He was born in Newport News, Virginia. And my father's father was Samuel Allen Sellers, and he was born and raised in Florence, South Carolina.
That's cool. All right. Hello, everybody. Hello, group here. My name is Jawah Williams. I'm a coordinator for university housing here, and I lived in various places. I was born in Washington, D.C., Southeast, and then I lived in Germany, California, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, and then D.C. again, and then now I'm back in North Carolina. I really didn't have a chance to know my biological father. You know, I met him for the first time actually when I was 21 in a funeral. And then we disconnected after that point. But I had fathers throughout my life. My grandfather, I stayed with him in California for a while. He was my mother's father, and he helped just instill in me some ideals and actually a passion for learning that I never knew I had until when I was older, I was able to recognize that. And so that is a person, Samuel Williams, left a big mark on my life. So that's who I am.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Dontrell Parson. I have the opportunity to serve as Director of Graduate Admissions. My father is Lindsay Ward Parson, and then my amazing grandfather is Paul James Parson. And then my great grandfather was Paul Alexander Parson. And I'm very grateful for those men. I grew up in Taylorsville, North Carolina, which is in Alexander County. It's about an hour away from Boone, actually. So I stand on the shoulders of those men.
Okay.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Alex Howard. I have the opportunity to serve as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs here at Appalachian State University. I am the son of Tex Howard, who is the son of Samuel James Howard, who is the son of Jerry Buck Howard. I think I heard a Samuel, and a James over here. So I appreciate that, Samuel and James, and it's all coming together in my fathers. So everyone was from the southeastern part of North Carolina. My father was career military. I came into the world as a sharecropper over in the tobacco fields and cotton fields of North Carolina, but left the farms that were not his at 19 and joined the military to go off and fight over in Vietnam. And the rest is history in terms of how I have traveled the world and been a part of his legacy.
All right. So we've had a chance to read the book, to at least peruse it. And I have a few quotes that I want to throw out there for us to consider. And then if there are anything else that you all have, feel free to jump in, throw those things out or what have you, because I mean, this is a conversation among fellas. All right. So the first that I have is this quote comes at the beginning of the book, where it says, Coates says, "When the journalist asked me about my body, it was like she was asking me to awaken her from the most gorgeous dream. I have seen that dream all my life. It is perfect houses and with nice lawns. It's Memorial Day cookouts, block associations, and driveways. The dream is tree houses and the Cub Scouts. The dream smells like peppermint, but tastes like strawberry shortcake." You know, I think about him talking about this dream and how much that, for me at least, represents my childhood. My parents moved into a neighborhood that was predominantly white, that had the picket fences, the block associations, the driveways, all of that, in hopes that it was going to get my sister and I away from the dangers of the streets and all of that kind of stuff. So I lived the dream that he talks about here. But it was very different for me because I would leave there and go to church, which was down East End, Newport News, predominantly Black area where my grandparents lived, and it was a completely different world there. So I straddled two worlds growing up, between the world that I knew as church and my grandparents and many of my other relatives, and then the predominantly white area that I grew up in, that was, you know, what my parents were looking for in that dream. What did that dream look like for your parents?
For me, it was not to return to Southeast North Carolina, to get out of Sampson County and not be a part of the hog industry, swine industry, that the majority of my family are still connected to. And for my father, I remember him saying often, again, as a career military individual, did 21 years in the service, he would always say to me, "Alex, those white boys had something I didn't have. They had an education. And so they got to tell me what to do for 21 years, despite the fact of me having the experience and the knowledge of what needed done. Go get an education. I didn't have the opportunity, go get an education, and don't let anybody stop you from doing it." So for him, the dream was, you don't come back to Southeast North Carolina without an education. And if you do end up back here, you better be telling somebody else what to do. because you had an opportunity to get the education.
I remember that conversation too. Dontrell, Juwan.
I would say the dream for my parents, the dream was similar to the dream I think of my grandparents. One to raise a strong family, and then two, of course, to be independent and to be successful in whatever manner that looked like. But I think the end goal was to make sure that their children's lives was easier than their lives were, and for past family members. So again, to make life easier, make life better. And I think that my parents were able to accomplish that. My parents grew up in the country. They didn't necessarily grow up in the streets. And I grew up in the country. I didn't grow up in the streets. But one, I had an awesome experience in the country. I think with that particular quote that you read in regard to growing up in the streets, I didn't have the same experience, but in regard to going to church, then I share the same experiences that you have there. I think going back to my grandparents, though, their dream was similar but different. And my grandparents' dream was just to provide for their family, to love their family, and their job and their role was different. Dr. Howard talked about his family, I think, having a business or raising livestock or pigs. My grandfather did the same thing. But one of the things that I didn't know, a lot of the jobs that my grandfather had were jobs that he didn't necessarily want, but they were jobs that had to be worked out of sheer necessity. And one of the things that blew me away about my grandfather, I didn't learn until the age of 16 that my grandfather could not read nor write. So I grew up 16 years being associated with my grandfather, not knowing that he could read, that he couldn't read, and then he couldn't write. I never knew that. I was oblivious to that. But that shook me, but at the same time caused me to value education. One of the things that he would always say, regardless of what you do, make sure above everything else that you get an education. I didn't really understand what he meant by that until after the fact. And I didn't learn that until after he had passed. So small things like that will forever be cemented in my mind. And the way I found out about the fact that he couldn't read or write, I found an old driver's license one day. And at the bottom of the driver's license where it had your signature, it just had a little line that was a little squiggle. And therefore, that's how I found out and how I knew when I started putting two and two together. But those are the dreams of my grandparents and my parents. Okay.
The dreams of my family, my grandfather, my mother. I saw, like, from my childhood, they were really invested into, like, me, to be successful and, what they deem as success. And, what they deem as success is like just surviving your own struggles. Or my grandfather, in his own right, he was a CEO of a software company in California. So like business ownership was like possible dream for like my mother and I in the future. And, we traveled so much and so often that, we lived in houses that had the white picket fences. And then, we also lived in areas very similar to Baltimore. We actually lived in Baltimore for a time. So our dreams were aspirations for success in our own right, basically battling our own adversities. My mother, she joined the military just to get services for healthcare for myself. So her dream was to see me live a life without complete hearing loss. Or, my grandfather, would invest in her dream to see me in that light. So our dream was to overcome our own adversities or our own struggles, in our own right. So is that business ownership or just being financially successful, and not having to depend on living paycheck to paycheck, as we were at that time. So, yeah.
I think there's a there's a theme with, particularly with our parents and grandparents, of doing things out of necessity. My dad worked in the at Newport News Shipbuilding for 38 years. I believe he hated every minute of it, but he provided a middle-class lifestyle for us that we were able to do things that, you know, other people couldn't do or what have you, but it was out of necessity that he got up butt crack of dawn every morning to go to work, came home smelling like steel in the evenings. And even when he was dead tired, you knew he was tired, but he would still, you know, take that time to, during the summer, take us to the pool and stuff, you know, jump on the road on the weekends and travel, go see my aunt up in New Jersey, or go down to come down here to North Carolina, those kinds of things. But there were things that he did out of, it was purely out of necessity. He had other opportunities, but chose not to take them because he saw that as the best way for him to provide for us. Talk a little bit more about that necessity that our parents, our grandparents saw in making things better.
For me, it builds upon what Dontrell was saying about with each generation doing better than the former. And my parents would both say all the time, son, we have never had options. We have had to respond and react in life to get by, to maintain, to provide a meager existence for you all, in hopes that you will have opportunities and options we didn't, that allow you to do better than what we have, what we've been able to do. But it was all options. They functioned out of necessity. And I resonate with everything you said about your father and going to, how he made a living and providing. Because I think that was both my parents. Mom worked 3 jobs, dad did 21 years Army, and then went to work as a state correctional officer. And I never heard any of them talk about how much they enjoyed their work, or how much they, I made a difference today. Right? It was like, deal, right? I'm saying? It wasn't that excited. It was like, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, it's time to get out the house and head in. And that's not my existence, right? And it's all because of their forced life of necessity, and hope and dream that I would have options to do things differently.
Yeah. My mother, she joined the Army out of necessity, to provide a life or options for myself. And I recognize that, like, even to this day. And, out of that necessity, there's moments where, like, they sacrifice their own personal goals that they want to achieve to help us achieve our goals or to further our potential, in a certain way. So if that was like, staying in the military or getting out of the military, but working different jobs, or living in an area that wasn't really conducive to their personal or interpersonal wellness, but it was successful because, hey, you have good schooling. So things done out of necessity. It was just multiple levels for myself, for my mother and my grandfather too. He did things out of necessity, like he would take care of myself, my cousins, and everything like that, and take care of a software company. So, necessity, when I was younger, I saw that as like sacrifice, and there's nothing that you get a reward immediately from it, but it's an investment.
Right.
I look at I had a conversation with my mother the other month, and I was like, hey, I see you creating a retirement plan for yourself. You've been doing all this stuff that's been necessary for not only yourself but myself, but I want you to focus on you. And now she's doing like girl trips and, living her best life, right? But that's the point where we are at now. We didn't have that blessing, or we didn't have these blessings 10, 15 years ago, right? So
I like that word, investment.
Yeah. I think as it relates to necessity, the amount of hours, the amount of time that they put in, that they invested, I think places us in a position to where we still had to invest. And I won't say we don't invest as much, but I think in regard to just the hard, intense labor of investment is, I guess it's not as strenuous. For example, my grandfather growing up, he hacked lumber, which is a hard physical job for those are not aware of hacking lumber or stacking lumber. That's what he did. And then also he had a farm. So in regard to just having crops and always being in the garden, which we were always out doing something. That's how we learned to do different things outside and to help us build character. But those long days in the field, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and then coming in about 8 o'clock or dark when it's dark in the evening, and did that on a cyclical basis for years. Then you fast forward to my father, who went into the military, served in Vietnam, came back, worked in the textile industry, and then had the opportunity to retire probably 10 years ago. But that's all afforded me the opportunity, and due to their investment, due to their sacrifice, out of necessity, it's placed me into a better position, in a better position, a better place, coming from the field to textiles, now into academia or into higher education. And that transition, or being able to be placed in that position, is a blessing, and that's due to them and their work. And our hope is that I will be able to do the same for my son and the upcoming generation.
You know, thinking about, because I just was sitting here looking at the four of us. Our parents charted a path for us that now we are here in the academy, sitting here with advanced degrees. Like my dad would say, with these college hands, can't seem to look at hard work. But thinking about the investment they made that got us to where we are, and this hope that education was this way out. You talked about how your dad, you got to go get it, but above all, you got to go get an education. So if you do come back here, you telling them what to do. I remember having that same conversation with my father, but I came to a realization this would have been summer of 2015, that my degree don't mean a doggone thing when I see those blue lights behind it. Or when I walk up on a situation and I see those uniforms. The degree doesn't mean a thing. The money that I'm making, the house, the kids, the life, all of that makes no difference in that moment. And it was a sobering thought, because it knocked a pause in me. Then I'm like, so what did I do all this for? And I still come to that every now and then, asking myself, what did I do all of this for? Because when it comes to these Black bodies, especially male Black bodies, there's not this value, because our parents placed the value on us. And Coates talks about how his mother said, or his dad said, that I would assume kill you before I let them have you. Because I remember that conversation too. I'll never forget, I came home with a D, which was a cardinal sin in our house. My dad said, I will kill you before I see you working in the shipyard beside me. And I was like, this joke crazy. But, it was I heard the love out of what he said. but I also heard the urgency of going after education. But then to get to this point and realize it don't mean nothing. What does education mean in the eyes of all that we've been through?
I can speak on that right now. I was living in DC in 2014, 2016, that time period. And that was, I had dropped out of college. I was in my senior year, I dropped out of college. I was taking care of my mother. She had breast cancer at the time. My only focus was like helping her because, you know, it's that sacrifice thing. I want to give back. I want to invest back. So I was working in about 3 to 4 jobs in DC at the time. I was making good money though, but it was, you know, it was all being put aside for different things. And that was where, you know, I was driving a moped and my moped got stolen on Thanksgiving. So I started driving Ubers. I was hustling. Man, I had contacted my friends like, hey, can I use your cell phone number for a new Uber, you know, promotional thing? I get 10 free rides, right? So I was in the Uber going to one of my jobs, which was at an elementary school. I worked with children at the time for a nonprofit. And this is the first time I saw a dead body, was on the way to the elementary school. It was a Black male with dreads on the ground, and there was a police officer just standing there on his radio waiting for somebody to come in. And the person, if you see a dead body, you realize that's a dead body. And this was about a year or so after the Freddie Gray, you know, situation that happened in Baltimore. And during that time, I was working in Ellicott City, which is near Baltimore, like 10, 15 minutes away. So seeing that dead body reminded me like, oh, I dropped out of college and I'm working 4 to 5 jobs right now. And I don't have a degree to my name. I can't apply for anything else I want to. So like the education that I wanted to get to, not be in a situation where I'm seeing bodies like me on the ground, or I'm not taking a W4 bus in Washington, DC to get to work, or having to hustle people's phone numbers just to get to work, to get a $400 paycheck. Like that's something that, you know, education could give me an opportunity to not be in it anymore. So a couple months later, after my mother's cancer remission was confirmed, she was cancer-free, I applied for a job at my old college. I had visited them for spring break, and they said, you want to work for us? I'm like, yeah, what's up? And they said, we can pay for your degree for you to finish it up and get your master's degree. And that was an opportunity for me to continue my education and then continue to invest into myself, and exactly what my mother was investing to me. So that moment when I saw that body was a summation of all the lessons of all the whoopings I received, you know, kind of like all like, it was that moment for me. It was the Freddie Gray moment. It was, you know, that moment where I saw that body. It was just different things, accumulation of stuff. And that's where it clicked. Like, I wasn't taking college seriously, you know, when I was in college. I'd barely, you know, focus and study for my classes. I was a full-time football player, as a full-time RA. But then now I really wanted that education. I wanted that. I was hungry for it. I could not sleep until I got the degree. So that is, you know, my inspiration. So when you say academics, new opportunity, that's what I think about. So, yeah.
For me, it's a constant reminder of residents within multiple worlds, like dual worlds, maybe even universe, I don't know. But sort of this duality of existence. It was the key to get out and to have different opportunities and options. But it's also the source of a lot of anger, a lot of frustration that is endemic to my daily existence, that speaks exactly to what you're saying. It really doesn't matter. I've been pulled over, I've been approached, I've been searched when I'm with my cousins, and I'm one of only like 5 in the entire family that left. And so it's, you know, when I'm back home, I'm with the bros. And when I'm with the bros get down like the bros. And when people approach us, when things are going on, there are conversations and assumptions made that we're all engaging in this, that, and another. But it's always clear, they're like, oh, you the book boy, is what you get from the authority figures. And so there's a sense of, you want to isolate me, yet we are all being subjected to the very same thing. And what you are creating in this time and in this space is a wedge that even with the people that I'm experiencing this with, they will walk away with perceptions and feelings about how there was another layer of gamesmanship at play, if I can phrase it that way, in terms of you different, but I'm going to remind you that you the same as your brother right here. And it's yeah. So for me, it was a key. Get out, do things differently, but it's a source of a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, because nothing really changed. I'm still Black. I'm still seen as everything that the world wants you to be. That may not live up to what you really are.
I totally agree with that. I think at that particular juncture, when you see blue lights, you tense up. You ask yourself probably 10 questions in 10 seconds. Was I going too fast? Did I have a seatbelt on? What was the speed limit through here? What have I done? Who are they looking for? You know, those sorts of things, which causes me to question myself. But at that point, as you indicate, education doesn't matter. You know, all they see is a Black male, which, you know, as we know, we're much more than that. But education does not matter, you know, at that point. So it's just always on alert, always on alert. Always cautious, whether I'm, you know, walking, driving, it doesn't matter. Wherever I am at or existing, always cautious.
You know, I said when I was growing up, the things that my parents told me I was never gonna say to my kids. You know, the stuff that my parents did, I'm never gonna do that to my kids. And a few years back, we're living in South Dakota. My middle son, Mason, comes in and he's in tears because that weekend, all the other kids were going for a sleepover and they were going to hang out and all that kind of stuff. And he didn't get invited. And it was as much as he had dealt with and seen race and all of that in his young life, this was the first time it really affected him to the point of tears. And it was with tears in my eyes, I had the conversation with him about what it means to be a Black boy. And Coates talks about that here too. What that means to be a Black boy. Some of that is in one place he talks about where we get that conversation, you got to be twice as good to get half as much. That conversation, you know, about when you do get pulled. I remember when my oldest son first started driving, that other conversation we had. When you see those lights, you put both hands on the steering wheel. You roll down the window. You're respectful. You look them, you all these things that you have to do when that occurs. And I never thought I would. I didn't, and I've been doing diversity work for over 20 years now, and I didn't think I was gonna have to have that conversation. But here I am having those conversations. And I know both of you have Black boys that you're raising. You don't have it yet, right?
No.
Okay, not yet.
No.
But thinking about those conversations, it makes me think we haven't come as far as we thought we had.
No, I don't think that we have, at least from my perspective. I'll never forget, I was riding along with my father and mother. We were coming back from my grandmother's and riding in the car with dad. I was the oldest of four, always had to stay awake. And that was kind of my responsibility as the oldest. You need to stay awake. Therefore, you know how to get back home. If you need to get back home, if you need to drive, then you'll be able to do that. So I always stayed awake. One, just to be respectful and listen to my dad, but also to be there for my dad if he were to need anything. And I remember one evening, we were just driving along and my dad got pulled. So the officer came around, I'm in the back seat and my mom is there. She's making sure I'm good. I have no idea what's going on. And the officer comes around and, you know, asked my dad a few series of questions, which he answered no to. And then the next thing I know, the officer pulls my dad out of the car and then leans my dad over the hood and then puts him in handcuffs. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? Like, you are, you know, just arrested my dad. Like, this makes no sense, you know, to me. And I remember it's clear as day. And then probably about 5 minutes later, they took the handcuffs off and he got back in the car and then we rode on home. Dad didn't really say too much more after that. I can only imagine how he felt. But that's something, you know, when you said that, that's something that came back to my mind. But I just keep those things in mind because you can never be too careful. You can be doing the right thing. You can be doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, but find yourself in that situation. And it's sad. But in regard to, I guess, being in a position to feel as if we have progressed, I don't think that is the case. I would like to say, you know, when my son, who's now 5, you know, in whatever, you know, 14 years, whenever he drives, that the situation is going to be better, that he will not encounter that. I don't feel confident enough to say that. I'm not a betting man, but if I were a betting man, I would say that would not be the case. So trying to work to prepare him for that when he becomes of age is very interesting because I'm waiting on it. He's 5, he's in kindergarten, so he's oblivious to everything. He's oblivious to race to a degree because right now when he sees another kid that's unlike him in class that may have blonde hair, he says, well, he has blonde hair and I have black hair. And that's all that he knows. So he's oblivious to everything. So it's just a matter of time before my son has that experience that your son has, and we have to have that conversation. And I'm just waiting on it and trying to determine at what point is that going to change, or at what point is that going to turn for him to come to that realization, like, oh, well, I'm brown and you are blonde. And that's what he says in regard to skin tone. But it's not white, it's blonde. So he associates skin color with hair color. So he's like, Dad, you're brown and I'm light brown and my friend is blonde. And I just let it go because eventually we'll have a conversation. But I hope it gets better. But I don't know. I'm an optimistic individual, but at this point, based on my experiences, I think based on where we are as a society and past experiences, and you mentioned hope before, I am hopeful about a number of things, but that is one area, even though I'm hopeful for, I'm not as optimistic about that.
I appreciate the way you just framed that in terms of hopeful but not optimistic, because I think that's where I am. And part of it for me, this is you just hit a button when you start talking about this in that conversation. Because I just recently had another conversation with my 10-year-old, And I remember a few months ago, it's been longer than a few months, about a year. My dad and I being on the phone talking about George Floyd, and my dad crying and saying to me, son, none of it matters. It's all been a lie. I have bled for this country. I have murdered for this country. I have detained my own for this country. And I have told you and your 4 siblings the way out. And there is no way out, son. It's all been a lie. And I remember sitting on the phone with my dad, my hero, and hearing him cry, choked up about this. And I remember Braden tried to come in the room when I'm on the phone. I screamed, get out of here, and screamed at him. And I screamed in response because I'm sitting there in this space of raw emotion. My hero is crying, thinking about his 77 years on this planet and how it was all a lie. What his parents told him was a lie. What this country sold him as how we can do it better was a lie. How he has told me for my 39 years, this is what you need to do, and it was a lie. 2 months ago, my son had an interaction at school. His primary instructor said, hey, you're done. You've requested to go to the restroom, go ahead and go. He stepped out of his main classroom, sent me to the hallway, and the other teacher in 6th grade was a white male. So what are you doing out here? Braden replied, Miss such and such said, I have permission to go to the restroom. I finished my assessment, I need to go. The male instructor said, you don't have permission to do anything. Go back to your classroom. My son said, and this is all based on what my son has said, so there is some bias, but my son says to me that he said, I have permission. I don't care that you have permission. You don't question me. You do what you are told. Now I'm gonna tell you something. Text Howard. But this whole, you go get this education because they had something I didn't have, and when you come back here, you tell them what to do. I'm always sitting at a 9, ready to throw hands, particularly when someone says, you don't question me, you do what I tell you to do. This hope that we will one day be at a place where we can speak as equals, we can challenge as equals, it doesn't exist. And so I had to have that conversation with my son and to tell him, here's some things you might need to incorporate in your day-to-day interactions with this individual. And all the while in my mind, what I'm wanting to do is go lay hands on this individual who has just brought forward to my 10-year-old this reality that even when you think you have permission to do something, you don't have permission to do anything. It's painful, not only to the kid, but as a parent sitting in that space, perpetuating for another generation this lie that you do have equal footing. You do have opportunity. You have quasi, you have pseudo opportunity and authority. It's painful.
It is. Absolutely. I think the emotion that this book brings up, particularly reading this book while Black, brings up a whole different level of emotion and all of that. Because there were parts in here, because like I went to Shaw University, historically Black institution. That was my Mecca. He went to Howard University. That was his Mecca. You know, and the emotion that goes along with thinking about that, but then the raw, real emotions of seeing the blue lights, of recognizing what it means to be Black in America, brings up a whole lot. I probably, you know, as big and as burly and manly as I am, I cried more in the past few years over stuff on the news and things going on with my kids than I probably have ever in my life. But it's that raw emotion. It's that raw nerve that just somebody hits it.
Yes. Right.
All the time.
Yes. And then you also find yourself fighting with but then I play into this notion of being an angry black man. You damn right I'm angry. I'm angry for all of this mess.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think those are instances where I think everyone has moments where life is real. That's one of those instances where life is real, and it gets real really fast. And that's what I define as sobering moments. You're going throughout your day, everything is fine, and then you see blue lights. I was like, because. I think one of the quotes that was up there was talked about before, at least was police officers. Honestly, with me, I really don't want to see a police officer unless one, there is an emergency that I need assistance with, or it's some type of community-wide event where a police officer is there working or assisting the community. Outside of that, seeing a police officer in any capacity is not in my favor or in my best interest. So, and that's just my general thoughts, just based off experiences, just in general. And those are conversations I've had, with my nephews and, other gentlemen. So if you see officers outside of certain situations, then that's not a good situation to be in, and you have to conduct yourself accordingly. And those situations can be extremely, extremely challenging.
Well, I know we got to get to question and answer, and we got to open up the fishbowl to everybody else. But there's one more piece I want to hit before we do that. And I will come to you first in talking about the role of Black women in our lives. Because truth be told, as much as I got from my grandfather, my father, my uncles, my cousins, all of that, it's been the women, the Black women in my life that have pushed me, yanked me, got me in line with a whole lot of things and given me opportunities I otherwise would not have had. So the last thing I want to hit, and Coates doesn't talk as much about this, but I do want to hit it in our conversation about the role of Black women in our lives.
So just this in general?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm talking like about my mother, by my partner, they just kept me together when I didn't know when I was apart, right? Either emotionally or just like, a different way. It's like just leading by example. I learned all about leadership from my mother, and I grew up in a single parent household. So like, I'm assuming when I become a parent, I'm gonna, adopt some of that stuff to my parenting skills and maybe like, try to do something different because, I recognize that I am, different identity wise. And then like, in terms of like, partnerships and stuff, like, and even like colleagues, it's, it's different, like great support, I'll keep on rambling, but, like there's so much that, the Black woman, goes through, when they are supporting us or not even supporting us. Like there's their own type of struggles. Like I've seen, like Black women suffer through issues with hospitals and doctors or, discrimination in that way where I don't even face that type of discrimination because of my privilege as a Black male. And like that's something that I do recognize and I have to respect. Like it's a struggle, but sometimes people struggle differently. And then I know the book didn't really addresses a lot too, but like like Black people and who are part of the LGBTQ plus community too. There's a whole different spectrum of struggles with that, and supporting one another through all that stuff is a lot. And I would not be where I am, truthfully, without my mother, who was a Black woman, telling me that, yes, I can do something when I told myself I could not. When I told myself I could not be in college, she's the one that told me, no, you're going to be leaving my house right now, today. She's the one that told me, when I was not working, I was just chilling, playing PlayStation. She's like, hey, you're not going to return back to this house until you have a job. So she took me out to a shopping plaza, dropped me off, and said, here you go. Go introduce yourself to some people, get a job. By day 2, I got a job right there on the spot for my first job, which was at a grocery store. So laying that framework, that groundwork is really important. And then with colleagues and partners, is just that connection, that you have with them. It's just, yeah. So I'm rambling. I'm going to the person.
I would say for me, people say beside every good man's a good woman. And I can definitely say that, not only for my mother, but just the women in my life. And I would say the women in my life Black women just have been compasses or a compass for me. Going back from my mom to the ladies in the church, to ladies or colleagues on App State's campus. So they have been very influential into establishing the person that I am today. So when you see me, it's a mixture of, I think, the males, strong Black males in my life, but also the strong Black women as well. And I think it takes both. But just when I think about the Black women in my life, I just start laughing because there's so many different dynamics and so many different women that come into play. Ladies that will feed you until you can't eat anymore. Ladies who will make sure that you're on the straight and narrow. Those ladies who are always there to lend an ear and listen first and then respond. So one, I've just been very fortunate to have that opportunity, and just glad that they've been able to be a compass in my life, and I'm fortunate for that.
I echo all of that. When I think of, for me in my life, men always represent sort of this dogged determination that anything might be possible if you just work hard, just keep working hard and just outwork them. Black women in my life, there was this bold sense of love and dreaming about something bigger and better, and that it was out there. You had to be faithful. You had to be, a steward of your resources, yourself, your ethics, and all these things. And so I appreciated that. I always have. I also have always appreciated this in that bold love. I'm gonna tell you how it is now. I ain't gonna sugarcoat nothing. But also this, I'm still gonna love you even when you're messing up. And that has always been absolutely core and fundamental for me. When I would act out in a variety of ways, my father had a certain way in which he would deal with it. And my mother had a certain way, and my grandmother had a certain way. And so it took all of that to give me sort of this perspective of the hard work, but also some level of dreaming, being bold and audacious came from Black women. The other thing I would say, my closest friend, female friend, beyond my partner, is my sister. And I mean, my sister and I are once, opposite sides of the same coin kind of thing. And to this day, we talk daily. And I appreciate Lazita for all that she is and has been in my life, because you marry people you're around, and I did not go to Central, Shaw, or A&T. I went to High Point, which was practically all white, and was around a bunch of white folk and studying, and then I married a white woman. And so when I told Lazita, my sister, she said, well, what the hell are you thinking? And I said, well, you told me to be bold, and there ain't a whole lot of this where I'm from, and I done fell in love. And she said, well, look here. This is what you need to do. And I appreciate the way she sat me down and talked to me very straight and honest. And then I appreciate when Jennifer came into our family, the way she sat Jennifer down and talked very honest and transparent to Jennifer about what it was going to mean to be married to this Black man that is my brother. And that with my sister, and that being reinforced by my mom, has been, I mean, that's the only way that I've been able to make it, is there's a strength in their bold love and unwavering support in everything that I've done, even if it's been different than the way my father and the male figure said how I should be going about the work. They have always been there to be honest, transparent, and to love and be very forgiving and to keep pushing.
Absolutely. Thanks. Well, thank y'all for sharing. I appreciate you. Y'all my brothers. Thank you.
Thank you, Juwan. Thank you.
Thank you for the privilege of eavesdropping on your conversation. Very, very enlightening, informative, and thought-provoking. My name is Marty Mesner. I'm the son of Leonard Mesner, who was the son of Michael Mesner. And that's my lineage going back. And I just love the thought that we are a combination of people who we came from, who preceded us on this road. So many amazing cultural notions that we can learn and we can build upon as we converse and get to know each other. Probably the thing that most strikes me about an event like this is getting to know people that we have stereotyped or that we have seen as a monolith in the past. And I love the way Dr. Hoffman talked about the importance of the Intercultural Student Association and what an opportunity that is for us to get to know each other better. So thank you for taking your very valuable time to let us peer into what your story is. I have a couple things that I need to kind of mention. We do have folks out there on Zoom. We have folks in the room. We want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to ask questions, even though our time is somewhat limited. We have Professor Juwan manning our chat. So if you have a question out on Zoom land, feel free to raise your hand. I think we are probably going to let you unmute as well so that you can actually ask the question and put the emphasis on the part of it that you wish. So please feel free to participate. We had a few things that were kind of thought-provoking things at the beginning. If you want to pursue any of those ideas, that's fine as well. We have a QR code here where you can click on if you're technologically competent, if you're younger than I am, and complete a form. If you have not read the book, you can request a copy of the book, and we have some here that we can give you as you leave. So another perk for being in attendance in person. So I know you guys don't really want to hear me, but that never stops me. I'm an instructor, and we just kind of get carried away when you let us. But I'd like to kick off with one question. I don't know, Lamont, if you want to answer this. I think any of you are well qualified to answer this. I have to admit that when the blue lights show up in my rearview mirror, I get nervous too. Certainly not in the same way or to the same extent. But I'm wondering if it matters to you if the officer that gets out and comes to the window is black or white.
No. It's the lights in the uniform.
I was gonna say something. I said something to a grad earlier about this, but some skin folk are not kinfolk. Not all of them are gonna be like that. And maybe that's too real of a statement to say in this room right now, but that's something that I kind of think about, like, you look like me, but it's probably not gonna go down like the way that I perceive. So
yeah, I think I understand. All right, other people then. Do we have questions out there? Yes, Matt.
I have like this relatives that live in West Virginia, and every time we go back to West Virginia for like a family reunion, they have like an attitude towards the outsiders that have left West Virginia in that area, and they have like this sort of like hatred family issues as well, where like, since you're like educated men and you're coming back to like your, you know, where your family's from, do you have like the same issues?
For me, I don't. One, I think it's unfortunate that people would have that view of outsiders. But for me, no, for family members who are different, no, I will do what I can just to have a conversation. I think based on what you may experience, at least being from West Virginia, may be a little different. But when you said that, I was like, oh my goodness, like, wow, that's unfortunate. And it kind of made me feel a certain way. But, you know, even though, I don't know, I have an education or my other family members may not have an education, then I don't really feel indifferent from them because they're my family. And I want what is best for them. I want them to be successful, and they define it in a certain way. But most of all, I want them to be happy. But above that, I want them to be healthy as well. And I think all of those are really, really, really important. And as Dr. Howard was talking about, as far as the Black women in his life, as far as coming from a position of love, I love my family, even those family members, and I get along with majority of my family members. But for those family members who are different, or as we say at home, kind of sideways, or a little different, like we still love you, but you're different, maybe crazy to a degree, but we love you. We love you. And that's the thing that, you know, that's the thing I want to make sure my family members know, and that they feel at the end of the day, even though we have differences. And I think it's okay to disagree, but at the end of the day, as long as you know that I love you, I think that is extremely, extremely important.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, so I know you were talking about how the story about your son at school, and thank you. Yeah, and then you guys talked about how you all have to have that conversation with your children, and once you guys said that, you guys kind of all nodded and looked at each other as you knew what you guys were all talking about, and you guys kept talking about hope during that, and you think that, you know, maybe when you guys are grandparents, your son's son won't have to have that conversation. And what are some steps that everyone can take to make that change?
Got about 4 hours, I think. Thank you.
That's a paper.
I think the answer is yes. The hope is, you know, my boys will not have to have this conversation with their children, right? The unfortunate reality is history continues to show that this conversation will be needed. And part of that is people will be people, humans will be humans. And since the dawn of time, we have always found ways to differentiate ourselves from others. And in doing that, we have created power dynamics, right? You know that. So that's always going to exist. We're never going to get to a place where humans suddenly say, you know what, we all human. We just gonna hang out and everything gonna be good. That's never gonna happen. What we hope happens is that the degree of violence, the degree of pain that may be brought upon people is mitigated, is lessened to a place where, all right, you don't like me, and I ain't saying this is the way to go, but yeah, we just don't live with each other. That's still a form of violence, but that's not the same as seeing people physically assaulted on a routine basis, kind of thing. Again, not right. Mitigation of the kind of violence we're talking about. So I think that's a more realistic form. The other thing I would say, just personally, how do you get there? Again, not saying we ever will, but how do you get there? Hey, people got to realize all this mess we buy into and say it's important in terms of, it's not as important as you think it is. You believe what you believe largely because of where you were born, the family you're born into, and the geographic location in which you were born.
And I think Mr. Coates did a wonderful job of talking about how that is just fiction, this whole racial distinction that we made. I was reading an obituary a couple weeks ago of the man who filmed Rodney King getting beat. And that's decades old. And then we have George Floyd dying at the hands of police just a couple summers back. Really, where is the progress? And in my personal journey, it was Rodney King that kind of finally flipped the switch. What, again? I walked in my first protest ever. You know, I didn't. Enough is enough. I wish I could share more optimism, but based on all these decades of this going on, at least it's visible now, and maybe people are getting reaping the consequences of it. But how patient can one be? But more questions.
We do have a question on the student. Jose, would you like to ask it, or do you want us to ask it?
Yeah, I can ask it. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so I was wondering, how do you guys feel about the appropriation of Black culture from like any other outside group?
Well, for me, when it comes to appropriation, I just like folks stay in their lane. If you really want to appropriate, or you really want to come over this side, we're gonna do the reverse of Michael Jackson, darken up your skin, let you live the life completely. Not just for Halloween night, not just, you know, when you want to turn up in the car with, you know, hip hop or what have you. Just go ahead and live the life all the way. But yeah, I think folks just need to stay in their lane.
Dr. Sellers, I think Chris Rock said it best when he said, "I am a Black man with more money than I know what to do with, and ain't a white person in this room that trade places with me."
Wow.
It's cool to appropriate and live your night pretending like you Tupac, but in reality, you don't want this. You don't really want it.
Yes.
I wanted to ask about like the emotion, like the raw emotion that can feel that you'll feel when you're like in areas where you feel like being outwardly racist or discriminatory. Because my boyfriend's Black, he goes to UNC, and there's been so many times like he's talking about his accomplishments or stuff, and people are like, "Oh, you know I got that, right? It's because you're Black." And I'm like, "How dare you like subjugate him to just his race?" And like my emotion is like go hands, like I'm like ready to hunt you down, fight you, because I kind of blame him like that. And so, like, I mean, I was like wondering how y'all keep your calm in those moments, because like you can't have constructive like conversations if you're not in the right mindset. And I'm like ready to just like, boom, like don't talk to people like that. But I don't want to see like how y'all handle
that. I think every person handles it differently. Honestly, I think, and I can't speak for all of us, but for us, it can be a daily journey. It's a daily journey. And also, one, it's an automatic expectation. Meaning if I'm in a place or a space, regardless of where it is, then to a degree, I'm expecting something to happen, or I'm expecting to hear something, or I'm expecting to see something. And when it doesn't happen, I'm like, oh, that's awesome that it didn't happen. But when it does happen, I'm like, okay, more of the same. Same day, I mean, you know, same situation, just different day. So that's something that I've been trained to think about, and that training comes from my parents. Scenario 1 through 50, today being scenario 1. If this happens, then this is what you need to think about. This is how you respond. If this happens, then this is what you need to think about, and you have to respond. And it's just ingrained. It's just there. I would say to a degree, at this particular point, it's just innate, and you have an automatic response. Now, me, I always try to, what they say, remain calm. That's what I always try to do. And one, it can be challenging for individuals to remain calm based on the situation, but I do my best because I know if I don't remain calm, it's going to escalate the situation. It's going to, one, put me further in a situation that I really didn't want to be in the first place, but I'm here for some unknown reason. But again, it's innate, so it's just expected. It's another day. But when I don't receive it or I don't encounter it, I'm like, okay, that's awesome.
I think for me, there's this calculus that happens in my head. Like you talk about 10 questions that run through your head when you get pulled over. There's a series of questions and scenarios that run through your head, whether you decide whether I'm ready to put energy into this foolishness right now, or whether I want to just walk away from it and leave it alone. And there's a calculus that goes on with that in trying to figure out how do I feel about it? How should I feel about it? Is this a time to throw hands? Now, over the years, I've cultivated this teddy bear like Lamont that everybody loves and all of that. But at the same time, there's a grizzly bear down on the inside that you really don't want to tap into. So, it's all according to that calculus. What is it going to be today?
One thing I would add on to two things. One, I have to let you in on. So all of these guys right here are part of my don't lay hands on anybody today at work, Alex. They get a text, hey, I need to talk. Hey, meet me such and such. Hey, let's go for a walk. Yeah. When you come out of those spaces. And I will say this guy right here, he is my opposite. Dontrell is the most laid back, cool person you will ever run into. And he has walked me off a ledge so many times. I'm about to risk it all, bro. I'm done. We just gonna go out in a blaze of glory. We gonna go out. And Dontrell's like, brother, no. So I appreciate what they mean for me day to day in managing. The other thing I would also encourage all of you to look up, there was some research done about 10 years ago that looked at social determinants of health. And so they looked at race in particular, and race matters and why it matters. So when you control for educational level, income level, work classification, what would be considered blue collar versus white collar kind of things, and you looked at, still looking at identity, race, they saw that Black males had worse health outcomes when compared to their white counterparts. And where it got really interesting is when they said, let's take what would be deemed sort of the highest risk in the white male category. So factory worker, smokes, drinks, lower income, all these things, and put them against Alex Howard, has a doctoral degree, works in academic room. And they saw that this group, these individuals of white males, still had greater health outcomes than affluent Alex. You know why? Existing levels of cortisol within your system. Cortisol is a stress-related hormone within your system. Individuals of our identity tend to produce greater levels of cortisol, which has implications on our blood pressure, hypertension, which puts us at increased risk for stroke and cardiovascular disease, so on and so forth. What is believed to be at play are these day-to-day interactions that we have. When I have to send that text, when I have to make that call, when I have to do this, I need to walk. My cortisol has already spiked, and I do that daily. And what that ultimately does is start pulling on the number of quality years of life I might have across 30 years of these day-to-day interactions. So it's fascinating work. I encourage you to look into it. Dr. Adewale Troutman was a part of that, as well as Michael Marmot over in the UK. Really fascinating stuff that looks at physiologically what's at play as a result of race-based interactions.
Wow. Thank you. I think we're nearing the end of our time. There are a couple of things that I would like to point out. As a father of two sons, reading this book of a conversation that a dad would have, or a letter that a dad wrote for his son, I would never have to deal with these things. It was like opening a new world to me. Think, wow, what have, my kids would get fights and stuff, but nothing like the cortisol level raising events in this book. So if you want to really get a sense of what other people struggle with, that most of us, at least in Boone, are unaware of and oblivious to, I strongly recommend this book. I think it would be a great investment. Matter of fact, it's not even an investment, because if you go to the QR code that's on the screen, you can get a copy. If you're a faculty member who wants to read the book, great. But if you want to assign it in your class and incentivize your students to read it and to discuss it, there is a lot of grist for the mill, good, solid conversations in it. We'll do all the lifting of tracking whether people show up to conversations and so on. We're happy to help you engage students in any way you can in this topic. We're probably doing the same book again next semester. It's been that great. So if this piqued your curiosity, you have a chance to participate more fully. There are a few thank yous that we need to do. Really our panel. Thank you, panel, for being really this way. Thank you to the students who are here, who have engaged in this process as well. Thank you to the faculty that's gotten behind it, incentivizing it. You guys out and gals out on Zoom, thank you for clicking in. There are people that aren't on my notes here to thank, and I really need to say a thank you to them, to Meredith Pipes, to Kim Bach, to Tun Ong, who isn't here, people that this would not have happened without. So thank you so much for your commitment to very important topics. I think that concludes what I had to say. As you leave, please take your journals, continue putting important thoughts, thoughtful things in those journals. And if you click on the QR code, put your name in it, let the people know on the way out, pick up the book if you haven't had one. Thank you once again. Look forward to doing this kind of thing with increasing appreciation.